All right. Hi, everyone. Today we have Dr. Thomas Weimbs, who's founder and president of Santa Barbara Nutrients. And we're at the Metabolic Health Summit today. And so that's kind of talking about metabolic health, ketosis, and the benefits that that might have for various metabolic diseases. So I have Dr. Thomas Weimbs here. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about polycystic kidney disease. So he's an expert in that field and kind of going about, why he was first introduced into that field and, what really brought you into polycystic kidney disease and the research you've done.
It started when I started my first faculty position back at the Cleveland Clinic, in Cleveland, Ohio, and as a new assistant professor with no grant funding yet, you're trying to figure out what you're going to work on. And there was a family in Cleveland that's affected by polycystic kidney disease, the Jarretts. They wanted to sponsor or support PKD research at the Cleveland Clinic, and they had close ties with the Cleveland Clinic, and figured out that there's this new assistant professor who works with kidney cells. All right. So I was, not at all an expert in PKD or even, very much in kidneys. And, we had, some great meetings with them. They offered me funding to hire a postdoctoral researcher in my lab to work on PKD. So, of course, as a new assistant professor with no grants yet, you probably say yes to that.
Right.
And it turned out to be great. So we, read all the literature, see where the field stands, where there are gaps in knowledge, where we could contribute something. Hired a postdoc, and we got some research ideas, and the whole project actually worked pretty well. So we got some interesting data very quickly, and my first papers really from as a new assistant professor were all on polycystic kidney disease. My first big NIH grant was on polycystic kidney disease, so it kind of really shaped the trajectory of my research lab. And it's been, going strong ever since. So, we've made some initial discoveries sort of on a very basic science level, but then very quickly could translate things into animal models. And in fact, I think my first paper ever published actually led to clinical trials to test whether rapamycin, an existing drug, might be beneficial in PKD, which it wasn't. But at least I think it taught a lot of people a lot of things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see kind of the background and, where this kind of all evolved, because there are about 600,000 Americans in the United States that are affected by PKD, if I'm correct, and millions more, worldwide. So maybe talk a little bit about kind of the direction that your research took and just, I know there's a lot of findings, but maybe some of the few that are really the most important that you noticed during that time.
Yeah, so, the research in my lab took many twists and turns, but also the field, the research field in general. And in fact, PKD research has, really mushroomed quite a bit, since, we started to work on it. So there have been many labs worldwide contributing, making, great discoveries, oftentimes even discoveries, from left field, if you will. Someone discovers something that actually is of importance for polycystic kidney disease. I think altogether this has led to a much better understanding of the basic molecular mechanisms that underlie the disease, the pathogenesis, what really goes wrong in the disease. Although it is interesting, the genes, when they're mutated that lead to PKD, they were identified over 25 years ago. We still don't really know what they do, what the gene products do. So there's a lot of different functions that people have identified, including from my lab. But what is the actual purpose of these proteins is still quite a bit of a mystery, and that's mysteries are always exciting in science, of course, because you want to solve them. Yeah, but I think the good thing is by now. The research field has come really far, and there's a lot of translation into the clinic right now, a lot of clinical trials. Different ideas are being tested. Many fail, of course, There's a lot of drug development. Many pharmaceutical companies are interested in coming up with drugs for PKD. There have been some failures so far as well, but that's how this works. Yeah.
I think it's interesting too when you're talking about kind of drug companies. Everybody's trying to kind of find something, right? And it's mainly genetic disease. And so, I maybe talk a little bit about. So we are at the Metabolic Health Summit, and I'm wondering if there's anything about kind of maybe dietary interventions or things along those lines that research found as opposed to medication based.
Yeah, great question, especially here, at this particular conference. So I think that's really something that has become clearer and clearer over the last few years. That there's a lot of, the diet influences everything. In fact, it probably makes us sick, as a population, especially, here, let's say in America with our standard American diet. We have epidemics of obesity, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and all kinds of chronic diseases, including chronic kidney disease, which is just becoming much more prevalent over the years. And it turns out a lot of this is caused by dietary and lifestyle habits. We're being taught to eat high carbohydrate diets. We're eating chips and potatoes and pasta and rice and bread all day long, pizza and so on, which, it's not really necessarily what humans, Homo sapiens, are supposed to eat. Right? So back in evolutionary days when we lived in caves and, were running around and hunting and gathering, we didn't have refrigerators at home, we didn't have grocery stores and bakeries at every corner. And life was very different, and our genes kind of evolved to respond to to those dietary and lifestyle habits. So right now we're kind of doing everything wrong, and sort of I think that is the main cause for most of the chronic diseases that plague people in industrialized countries. So what does that have to do with polycystic kidney disease? I think our research and the research of a bunch of other labs as well has been sort of zeroing in on metabolic changes that are occurring in polycystic kidney disease. In particular, the cysts in PKD, that keep on growing and proliferating, that turn out to be glucose addicted, so they love sugar. That's what they like, and that what supports them and essentially induces them to keep on going and keep on proliferating and get bigger and stronger. So in our research, we found, if we take that away, if we put animals with polycystic kidney disease on a low-carb diet, a ketogenic diet, even something like time-restricted diet, that very dramatically changes everything. So it, if you will, it pulls the rug out from underneath these cysts, and they're somewhat stuck. They don't get all their sugar anymore. They cannot deal with the alternative fuel sources very well, and they seem to shrivel up and die. So that's, of course, what it's kind of all about. Yeah.
It's really interesting. I think everything kind of goes back to diet, right, and lifestyle changes. And so with the kind of ketogenic diet, right, I know you talked about that, and a lot of people think about ketogenic diet as, let's have a lot of meat and a lot of things like that. But when we're talking about kidney health, how does that kind of change specifically maybe in some of the research that you saw or anything that you might know about? Because it is a little bit different than a typical thing of, most people thinking of a ketogenic diet.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a really important question. If somebody looks up ketogenic diet on Google and internet versions, what you usually come across is sort of like a high animal food type of diet. Lots of meat, lots of other animal protein and so on, which is probably fine for most people with healthy kidneys. But the problem is that these diets are very acidifying. So they're essentially lead to a very acidic urine pH, which makes the work of the kidneys difficult. So the more acidic the urine is, the harder it gets for the kidneys to prevent the formation of kidney stones. And that has to do with citrate levels going down. It has to do with some things like uric acid, for example, being very insoluble at low pH. So essentially, you put the kidney at a disadvantage by acidifying everything. And there's a lot of great studies out there that already show pretty clearly that that plant-focused diets that are more alkalinizing are very beneficial in chronic kidney disease. So I think that's not really in dispute anymore these days. And I think a ketogenic diet that is very animal heavy may not be the best choice. That's why we came up with sort of a plant-focused version of a ketogenic diet, which is also has its own challenges because then you have to think about other compounds that are in there that you want to avoid.
Yeah, very, very neat. I think it's important to kind of, determine exactly the ketogenic diet or renal diet friendly that it is for those with kidney issues. And so we'll kind of go back a little bit, founder and president of Santa Barbara Nutrients. And so we're actually here today in Santa Barbara, which is really cool. And kind of want to talk a little bit about, your research and how it led to the development of a product called medical food KetoCitra, and tie in together your research findings with that as it relates to kidney health.
So it really came out of my lab research at UC Santa Barbara, where we found that these dietary interventions are highly beneficial in animal models of polycystic kidney disease. And it's really two different mechanisms that we discovered. One is the essentially the beneficial effects of ketosis. The other one has to do with preventing microcrystal formation in the kidneys, which can go on to form kidney stones and so on. So it turns out that these microcrystals that can form in kidneys, they can aggravate polycystic kidney disease, make it worse. And that has to do with things like calcium oxalate, calcium phosphate, but also uric acid. And there's some research we have done recently that's not published yet, and also says that uric acid is detrimental in polycystic kidney disease. It is actually not too difficult necessarily to counter all this with dietary interventions. You can, as a patient, right? So you can be on a low carb diet, on a ketogenic diet. You can do time restricted eating, for example. You can avoid these renal stressors that lead to crystal formation. By knowing what's in the food and avoiding the foods that are a stress on the kidneys. So essentially, it turns out that many dietary and lifestyle habits that we all have in industrialized countries are actually have a chance of worsening the progression of polycystic kidney disease. So we've come up with a whole dietary intervention program, the Renew program, but we've also come up with a what's called a medical food that sort of supports all these dietary changes. So it's this product KetoCitra. So UCSB had put out a patent on this whole idea, which is kind of necessary in order to actually form a company and try to come up with something, create something that you can actually make available to people. A lot of patients, after we published our papers, had sort of started to experiment with their own supplement mixtures and putting things together, which has, of course, the danger that if someone doesn't know what they're doing, they don't know what kind of a dose to use, what to avoid, what to include. That's not something I think that should be recommended necessarily. So we sort of made it our mission to come up with a kidney-safe formulation that we can make available and ideally combine with dietary and lifestyle recommendations and that essentially all reinforces each other.
I think that's wonderful. And I wanted to kind of ask, maybe go down and dive a little bit deeper into the main ingredients in KetoCitra and kind of how that helps to work together with dietary interventions. So I know it can be taken by itself, but of course we, kind of recommend dietary and lifestyle modifications as well. But what are the main ingredients in that and kind of how does that work to support kidney health?
Yeah, so it's really several main things that are in there. So one is the exogenous ketone, beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is the molecule that our liver usually makes during fasting when we're in ketosis. And you can, do all this by being in ketosis, by having ketogenic diets, by fasting and so on, which is of course hard to do, and you can cheat by essentially taking it, and that's why it's called exogenous. You take it into your body. So that's one of the components. This is beta-hydroxybutyrate. The other one is citrate. That is meant to raise the urine citrate levels, and citrate is really the natural defense of the kidney to make kidneys more resilient against these microcrystals that can form in the kidneys. So citrate can chelate calcium and can essentially antagonize the formation of these crystals, and patients with polycystic kidney disease usually have citrate levels that are way too low. So they have a high risk of forming these crystals and forming kidney stones. So citrate is one other important component. Another one is sort of the way it's formulated. It actually delivers an alkaline load, which means that it helps to normalize the urine pH, so which is also usually too acidic in patients with polycystic kidney disease. And then sort of the next component is that's again part of the formulation. There is calcium and magnesium in there, and KetoCitra is meant to be taken together with with a meal, and the calcium and magnesium will then bind to oxalate and bind to inorganic phosphate and lower the rate of absorption in the gastrointestinal tract to again help patients to avoid these harmful substances. So it's kind of like a whole cocktail, if you will, and that's actually also one reason it's a medical food, so it's not only one substance like a drug would be. It's like a whole mixture of ingredients that are all actually approved food ingredients, and so citric acid, for example, is in many different foods as well. It sort of is meant to come together and support all these dietary recommendations.
Very neat. And I think it's important too to kind of, like you alluded to earlier, right? A ketogenic diet that's typically people think about is high meat based and can cause, uric acid accumulation and then kind of kidney stone formation. And so that citric acid that's actually in KetoCitra kind of helps to prevent that and relieve the kidneys in that sense. My other question is just, we talked a lot about polycystic kidney disease and, dietary interventions. How do you think this might, relate to CKD? Are there similar mechanisms and potential benefit there that you might see?
Yeah, great question. I think of polycystic kidney disease really as a sort of a genetically determined form of chronic kidney disease. So sort of the initial trigger that leads to the disease is the gene mutation. There are many other forms of chronic kidney disease. Diabetes is the most prevalent way of getting chronic kidney disease, if you will. There's hypertension. There's things like uric acid leading to gout, but also to chronic kidney disease. And really, the progression of the disease from a biological perspective is actually very similar. So there's the same molecular pathways are usually activated in all these different forms of chronic kidney disease. It's the same, fibrosis, for example, is a big problem. I think that, the same approach, these dietary and lifestyle changes in combination with the medical food KetoCitra, I think have a high chance of being beneficial in not only polycystic kidney disease, but in many other forms of chronic kidney disease as well. So that's something we obviously are very interested in. We'd love to do clinical studies on different forms of chronic kidney disease, in addition to the clinical studies we're doing on PKD.
That's fascinating. I think that, more research to come, very exciting stuff. Appreciate you sharing kind of some insights based on your research at UCSB, and then also what led to the development of KetoCitra and Santa Barbara Nutrients too. So really appreciate your time, Dr. Weimbs. I know you have a lot of interviews to go to today as well too, but this has been very informative. Thank you very much.